Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around I am playing as the Skaven once again against the Lizardmen led by Leroy Jenkins on the map Mosquito Swamp. And this time around we are running a Lord Skrolk build, definitely going for that bit of a plague theme. So I wanted to do more of a horde army. The armies I've been doing lately as Skaven when I've tried to do quick match have been very elite and very small armies, often relying on heroes more so than massing units, and I feel like massed units kind of the way Skaven should be functioning, and it's more theme or lore friendly, I suppose. And I wanted to give him a shot and just try and make him work in a sort of a horde mode. So going here against the good old Lizardmen, I decided to build a comp that would hopefully counteract the lizards in a somewhat efficient manner. I did bring Lord Skrolk. I wanted to give him a shot, and I also wanted a fairly cheap Lord who could dish out some decent hurt. He does, of course, have the Rod of Corruption, which is an AoE damage ability, and here you can see the cannons are already firing off, so I'm actually going to pause. He does have the Rod of Corruption, which does damage to all enemies around him in a 30-meter radius, and it seems to me a pretty decent amount of damage. He also has the Liber Bonicus, and this is like a Spirit Leech, except from what I've seen, far more powerful. It can dish out ridiculous amounts of hurt to a target enemy hero or Lord or anything like that, and absolutely destroy them. Unfortunately, it does have a very long cooldown, so I definitely have to be on the lookout for that. Lord Skrolk himself is not a pushover in combat. He does have Contaminated, so he can debuff enemies' leadership. He does have okay weapon strength and decent melee attack, melee defense, all that sort of stuff. Even though his armor is pretty bad. He also does cause fear, and I did bring a bunch of spells on him, which I'm hoping will help me out in this fight. I don't know all the names yet, and I'm kind of learning them as we go along. I did have, of course, Plague of Rash, which is just a map-wide debuff when he's casting, for speed and vigor, and I do have Arrow of Pestilence, which is a constant AoE melee attack debuff, which I'm hoping to let my Skaven survive a little longer. But as far as spells go, I do have Bless with Filth, which is simply poisons all enemies within the AoE. Wither, which is a minus 30 armor in an AoE, similar to actually the Withering on the Lord of Shadows, but without the leadership debuff. But when overcast, it actually becomes a minus 60 debuff, so it's kind of like Plague of Rust or something. It actually causes pretty immense amounts of damage to an enemy, just by making him incredibly susceptible. I did bring Vermintide, so I'm able to spawn Clad Rats in my opponent's backline. I brought Plague, which is some sort of vortex spell that can do damage, and Pestilent Birth, which is allows me to spawn a bunch of Plague Monks behind my enemy's lines. Only 2 charges, but still pretty solid. And finally, Stand Your Ground, which of course is just there to buff my infantry up. You can see my Warp Lightning cannons are already firing on the enemy Bastillodon with a Soul Wrench on it. And so for going through my front line, I brought 2 units of Storm Vermin with Sword and Shield. These guys are just there to soak up the initial charge, soak up damage. These guys have 90 armor, so they're fairly tanky. And of course, having a massive amount of troops, 120 on large, these guys will be able to tank a decent amount of enemy hurt and just survive for an okay amount of time. With combining their trait of strength in numbers with their already decent melee stats, these guys can definitely hold out for an okay amount of time, especially by Skaven standards. For my main sort of damage dealing line, I brought I brought 4 units of Plague Monks, backed up by 2 units of Death Runners. Now the Plague Monks are basically just a solid frenzy-ish sort of unit. These guys are comparable to Witch Elves, though obviously not as good. They have a very solid melee attack, melee defense. They're comparable to something like Battle Pilgrims or Witch Elves or War Dancers, although not necessarily as powerful. There is a lot of them though, so they can definitely dish out quite a bit of hurt. And they are immune to they do have Frenzy, which will make them immune to Psychology, which is definitely a problem against Lizardmen, who can bring a lot of terror and fear-causing units. And they do have a slight physical resistance, which will make them a little tankier than their stats would otherwise suggest. In the middle here, in the heart of the back, I do have 2 units of Death Runners. And the reason I brought the Death Runners is because none of my other units here in the front line have armor piercing. And Death Runners actually have this pretty crazy ability called Weeping Blade, which is for 35 seconds will debuff enemy armor by 50%. And that means that against almost any unit the Lizardmen can bring to the field, they will be much weaker and much more susceptible to damage from all these fairly squishy anti-light infantry units. Like the Plague Monks this debuff will be capable of absolutely shredding through Star Wars Warriors, or even Temple Guards they'll be able to damage. And of course these guys also have a few side abilities as well. They do of course have Concealment Bombs, which lets them enter stock mode. They do have a very decent weapon strength with armor piercing, and they have built-in 30% physical resistance, which makes them pretty tanky. Spread out along the flanks here, I do have some Clanrat spears. These guys, of course, are just there to shut down enemy large on a budget. Their stats are pretty atrocious, even with the buff. Their melee defense is from strength in numbers. Their melee defense is atrocious. Their weapon strength is not good, but I'm hoping that with enough of them, I will be able to bog down an enemy large. For my shooting contingent, it's actually pretty light, but I did bring a warplating cannon. This unit has been doing me some actually impressing me quite a bit lately. It does magical damage, it has very solid range, and armor piercing with a true anti-large bonus. And the bonus advantage to large is actually 70, so it can do some immense amounts of work to enemy large monsters, cavalry, all that sort of stuff. And of course, lizardmen do tend to bring a decent amount of those. Finally, poison worm globadiers just to give me some ranged anti-armor units. And these guys can lob over the top of your troops without too much friendly fire, so they're definitely decent that way. Finally, they do actually have a respectable amount of armor, so they will be pretty resilient against the enemy or potential enemy range spam, because lizardmen do have a pretty wide variety of fairly cheap skirmish units. For my opponent, he did decide to go very wide, and this surprised me. Usually, with lizardmen, what I've seen mostly lately has been some pretty elite armies. This was a rather cheap army, so it was definitely caught me by surprise. He did bring a Saurus Old Blood with Cold-Blooded for that heal, Foe Seeker, and Stand Your Ground. So for a very cheap lord, though against the Skaven, who are not particularly stand out in their stats, especially not their lords, they will still perform pretty well against anything except, say, Queek. He does have two Skink Chiefs backing up his front line, and this I think is a bit of an interesting choice. These guys are a ranged hero, and while they do of course have Encourage, they do have some built-in missile resistance. They're pretty mobile. They can, I do believe, fire while moving, so they're just very solid in that way, but without mount, their damage output is not that impressive. So I was a little surprised by this, but they are a pretty cheap hero option. They will definitely provide my opponent with some annoying range support. You can see the first volley of cannon fire actually did some nasty damage to this Bastillodon with the Solar Engine, and they continues to fire off. You can see those little green Warp Lightning rounds just going at it. For my opponent's front line, he did actually bring a whole bunch of skink cohorts with javelins. These guys, despite not having the best of stats, will trade pretty well with most rat units, or most Skaven units, because the Skaven units are just that bad. Skink cohort with javelins, despite being a ranged unit on paper, are actually a melee unit. They simply have 3 javelins that they can throw off before a fight. It's kind of like a Roman legionnaire with a pilum. They can throw them in and then push in after. For his main kind of stiffening up the line sort of unit, my opponent did bring 2 Temple Guards as well as a single unit of Saurus Warriors with Saurus Spears. And these guys are pretty tanky, and they'll definitely be able to hold out for a very solid amount of time, as well as providing some armor piercing if needed against my troops. For sort of his main heavy support lineup, my opponent did bring 2 units of Feral Cold Ones, and these guys are actually a pretty cheap unit. Even though they might not seem like it, their stats are pretty poor, but they do bring armor piercing, of course, and they have fairly high armor. They're fairly mobile. They can definitely dish out quite a bit of hurt. Alongside a Feral Carnosaur, this could definitely kind of rampage through my backline, possibly cause terror outs, and just make me fall apart pretty quickly. So we're going to throw things into full gear here and see how things break down. You can see the Bastillodon is trying to tee off against Lord Skrolk. Unfortunately, it doesn't have much in the way of targets here with that Solar Engine, because most of these units here are pretty small. Perhaps shooting at the Bombardiers would be a good, or Globadiers would be a good idea, but other than that, my opponent doesn't have much to shoot at. Seeing my opponent pushing in towards me, I do counterattack with the Storm Vermin. I want the Storm Vermin to absorb the initial charges, and then I will push in with the lighter units like the Death Runners and Plague Monks. You can see the Spears are already pushing forward. Oh, sorry guys, I'm doing a cough there. Cough. You can see the cannon over here. It's back in the Bastillodon around, dishing out some decent amounts of hurt. The Bastillodon's already down to about 50% HP, so definitely doing a decent amount of work. Or you can see the Glanat Spears that push into the Feral Carnosaur. They are basically doing nothing, but they are stalling it out, while the Plague Monks push in, and these guys will be able to lay the smack down on these guys. And of course, with the fact that these guys are susceptible to primal the rampage, these guys might actually route off and start rampaging around. Saurus Spears are getting absolutely annihilated here between the Storm Vermin and Death Runners. Their armor will provide them no protection against the Death Runners, really. You can see the Globadiers over here in the meantime are tearing through the Temple Guards, because their armor piercing damage and explosive power is very, very solid, especially with the fact that Lord Skrolk has popped some of his abilities. He's also popped Liber Bubonicus, and you can see just how much damage it did that Skink Chief, knocking him down by about 1,000 HP. Here in the heart of the fight, the Feral Cold Ones are rampaging around, getting pincered by spears. You can see I'm pushing some more spears forward. All the while, the Warp Lightning Cannon is firing away at the Bastillodon, just trying to whittle down over time. Storm Vermin are over in here, just trying to bog my opponent down. The Feral Carnosaurs are a huge issue for me, because of course I don't really have much that can shut them down. The only thing I can really shut them down with is the spears, maybe, and the cannons. Cannon, though, definitely doing some decent amount of work, as well as some decent splash damage when it misses and hits enemy infantry. I'm keeping one unit of Clanat Spears here, just in case my opponent does decide to flank around and push in with, say, a unit of Feral Cold Ones. You see the Bastillodon has his rampage and pushed into the heart of my army here, but I'm still whittling it down, and it will shortly break and then finally shatter. can see it just gets absolutely annihilated there with some nasty focus fire. Sar's Old Blood has dove in, but once, like I said before, Skrolk does not have terrible stats, and he's definitely respectable in melee. With the help of these Death Runners, he'll actually be able to pull this guy to the ground pretty quickly. These Javelins are going in, and they're doing an okay amount of damage against the lightly armored troops I have, especially the Clan Rat Spears and the Plague Monks, but it's not going to do very much to the Stormvermin, who are tanking the majority of this damage. See in the back, I have cast a unit of Plague Monks on my opponent's backline, pushing in, as well as Wither, which is debuffing this guy's armor. Perhaps a bit of a waste, but I was hoping to get some more use out of these Plague Monks. But yeah, you can see I'm simply just trying to crush my opponent's front line, kill off his lord, and then kind of push into his back line. You can see these rampaging Feral Cold Ones are just pushing around over there. This Bastion's finally gone. Now my Warp Lightning Cannon has shifted fire onto this Feral Connoisseur, just trying to put it down. You can see the Connoisseurs, even though they're rampaging, are basically unstoppable. I do not have the units available to really shut him down. You can see these spears are trying to swarm all over the King Chief, just shut down his fire. I don't want him assassinating Skrolk, which is definitely a possibility if Skrolk gets isolated. The Sar's All Blood has fallen apart now, and he's breaking and retreating. This Feral Carnosaur is actually slowly but surely getting picked apart. And the Warp Lightning Cannon over here is doing some okay work against the Feral Carnosaur. You can see it's actually, I do believe, already gained a Chevron. It's already gained a Chevron, so it's definitely been doing some immense amounts of work. It's well on its way to the second Chevron now. And in the meantime, my infantry is just kind of swarming all over my opponent's troops. The Plague Monks are just smashing through these Skinks. The Skinks are not going to perform all that well against Plague Monks. They will perform well against most most of the Vermin units, but not against these guys. You can see Rod of Corruption has gone down and it's draining their HP. And it's definitely dishing out a decent amount of hurt. It's definitely much stronger than, say, Mist of the Lady. It guys has to be because it is a 135 second cooldown rather than an instant or a constant effect. The Feral units, of course, still rampaging around. They've gone down by about 1,000 HP, though, and they will eventually get taken down by sheer numbers. Over here, you can see the Globadiers are just pounding away at these Temple Guards. The Globadiers are actually doing some okay amounts of work. Definitely slowly but surely whittling down this Temple Guard. Feral Carnosaur has finally been sort of shattered and broken and run off the field, though it actually does terrify these Clan Rat Spears off, despite the fact that it itself is broken. The cannon is still trying to crank around. I'm trying to keep simply focus down the Carnosaur here and put it down with that cannon. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a miss there, and it instead hits my rats, but who cares? We're Skaven. We don't care about losses. And now my opponent's army is completely shattering, and that is the end of the game. So, very fun sort of game. Was definitely interesting. The large units are definitely a bit of a challenge to deal with for Skaven. You can bring your own large units. You can, of course, bring a Hell Pit Abomination, though that is a very expensive unit. You can bring more cannons, potentially. You can see the Warp Lightning Cannon get 2 Chevrons that game, which is pretty crazy. It was simply working overtime. It helped put down the Pastillodon, helped put down one of the Feral Carnosaurs. It was just doing immense amounts of work. The Saurus Old Blood, and the Skink Chief definitely got kind of shut down pretty hard. I definitely found the Liber Bubonicus on Skrolk to be very powerful, and the Skrolk debuffs were very solid. I also found that, honestly, with the Plague Monks and the Death Runners, when working in tandem, these guys are definitely very powerful. That Weeping Blade puts down the Templar Guard, who normally have very high, or pretty respectable stats. None of the Lizardmen infantry have the best of armor. None of them have bad armor, though, and with the help of these the Death Runners, my opponent's armor is just getting debuffed by an immense amount. Basically being hit by an armor sundering, or even more in the case of the Temple Guards. It was just allowing me to strip through them and melt them very, very quickly. Especially with the help of some of the support units like the Storm Vermin and the Clan Rat Spears and that sort of stuff. I do believe there was also some work done by some of the AoEs by Lord Skrolk, and definitely whittling down my opponent. In the case of my opponent, I do think Saurus Warriors are a bit of a better pick against Skaven than Skink cohorts and Temple Guard, honestly, because Temple Guard are a bit, in my opinion, overqualified essentially for fighting Skaven. Again, you'll tear through hordes much more efficiently, I think, with Saurus Warriors or Saurus Warriors with shields. Skink cohorts are not terrible against Clan Rats, but against the more elite units like the ones I brought here, they will definitely not hold up very well, and I think that's kind of where my opponent had some issues. The other thing is, of course, the Rampage units. In my opinion, a Feral Carnosaur, it costs 1,600 for every Feral Carnosaur you bring to the field, and it only costs 1,900 to bring the hero variant, the Feral Carnosaur, or the Saurus Chieftain, or the Saurus Warrior, mounted on a Carnosaur, and that will take Rampage and drop it down to the Primal Fury, or the whatever the the lower tier of rampages. So then your unit only rampages at 50% HP. And I think that was a huge issue for my opponent here, that a lot of his high value units simply rampaged off after taking a little bit of fire, a little bit of damage. And he simply wasn't able to control them, so he wasn't really able to get into my backline, get into my Warp Lightning Cannon, shut that down. The Warp Lightning Cannon just got immense amounts of work done, simply because these guys were rampaging around and not dealing with it. So yeah, definitely I think it's been fun. It's been a bit of a learning experience. Yeah, hopefully there will soon be a video for Malekith. I'll be posting that up shortly after this. I'll also probably post a bit of an opinion video on what my initial reactions to this game have been. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any requests for anything you'd like to see, be sure to post those down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Wyvern out.